After checking on my wife and making her a glass of tea, I went out the back of my house and crawled up the access ladder to the roof with the 203 slung over my shoulder. I used a length of rope to pull a broken party umbrella onto the roof and dropped it in the corner as a kind of makeshift tent right in front of the weep hole I had scouted beforehand as a good sniper position. I put the 203 underneath the party umbrella. From the air, it would look like a typical Mexican house in L.A. with some rubbish left over from a rooftop party piled on it. I didn't want the constantly circling police helicopters to see me on the roof with a rifle. Before I crawled under the umbrella, I took a good look in all four compass directions. Great billowing fires and pillars of smoke reaching up to the sky surrounded the house. It looked like a vantage point in hell. There were flames raging out of control nearly everywhere you looked, occasionally adorned by water spouts from fire trucks trying to douse them. It was cool and dark under the umbrella, but I had an excellent view of the street in front of the house. I watched for the next several hours as looters ran by loaded down with goods, sometimes pulling wheelbarrows or wagons piled high with booty. On occasion, when it looked like they might be parking on my street, I trained the rifle on them. They seemed to have a sixth sense, and nearly always moved on right about the time I was trying to decide whether or not to move my finger onto the trigger. Strangely enough, the alleyway was completely empty for the rest of the day, people avoiding it like the plague. I kept worrying the arsonists were going to come back. Sometimes I would get up to stretch my legs and walk the perimeter of the roof, checking straight down to see if anyone had pressed themselves up against the wall and was sneaking around the outside of our home. After a long time under the umbrella, watching people go by, suddenly a very lean, tall black guy jumped the fence of our house as he passed and looked back and forth, like he was checking to see if anybody was watching. He took one step and put his foot right down on one of our caltrops. He went rigid as a board, silently lifted his foot, and then let out a high-pitched wail. He clawed at it to pull it out of his soul, dropped over the fence again, pulling himself on his elbows and doing that funny whine. I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from laughing. I had tears coming to my eyes. He finally got back up and started hopping down the sidewalk on one foot, leaving a trail of blood droplets behind him. I remember thinking he'd better have a tetanus shot. Some of the nails we used for the caltrops were covered with rust. I did not quite fall asleep beneath the umbrella, but I did drowse at times, falling into a sort of routine watching looters and rioters walk by. When I opened my eyes, I saw a group of Hispanics had parked their asses on the car across the road and were lying across the hood. They had boxes of consumer goods opened all around them and had decided to examine their prizes. It was Trotsky's car across the street, my liberal anti-gun buddy. I could see Trotsky peering through the curtains like a furtive little mouse every few seconds, scared to go outside. As surely as coded bacteria in a computer simulation, once they had camped out on the hood of the car, other looters began to do the same. They were camping. I did not need anybody to tell me this was no good. If they camped, they might start a little siesta. Then maybe they'd get bored and decide to get into some trouble. You wanted these guys to keep moving. I trained the rifle on the guy who was smoking and leaned against the driver's side, looking at a laptop computer he had stolen. He was throwing lots of garbage from packing on the ground, along with the manuals and anything else he didn't want to carry. A real animal. The guys were acting like they owned the block. That was somebody's car they were lying on top of. If I shot these guys in cold blood with the rifle, I would surely go to prison. It might be convenient, but it would not be considered reasonable self-defense. I would have to go down and confront them. I crawled down the ladder and went inside the house. My wife was glad to see me and besieged me with questions about what was going on. I got the pump-action Remington Riot shotgun out from behind the water heater. I had bought it 3 months earlier, unbeknownst to my wife, never fired it, along with 2 boxes of shells. My wife's eyes went wide when I pulled it out and started pushing shells into the breech. "I hope you are not thinking of going outside with that," she said, "because I will divorce you if you do." I said to her, "Honey, if you're ever back this way again, be sure to look me up." When I got to the front door, my nerves failed. I peered through the curtains. A lot of Mexicans were out in the street. I knew if I stayed here too long, I would talk myself out of going out. I just had to do it irregardless of how scared I was. They could not be allowed to just take over the block and sit on cars like that. As I came down the front walk, I held the shotgun behind my trailing leg in back of me. The Mexicans looked up as my door opened and I came towards them, but because of the chain-link fence and a row of bushes, they did not see the shotgun when they realized I was coming to speak to them. "You fellas have somewhere important to go," I said as I walked towards them. "Anywhere but here is a good start." The Hispanic guy who was smoking sneered and took a long draw on his cigarette. "Who the fug are you supposed to be, man?" he said. His buddies all moved their hands to their crotches and began squeezing their testicles like it pumped blood to their brains. They all started that swaying and testicle-squeezing dance they do. Then one of the guys closest to the fence saw the shotgun trailing behind me and the sneer disappeared. They all stood up straighter and jumped down off the hoods of the cars they were on. "You fellas can't camp here. This ain't bean person of color heaven," I said, then brought the shotgun up around waist level and pointed it towards them. I opened the gate and went out into the street. "You need to get the fug off my block right now." I was sweating so badly from fear it was dripping into my eyes. "What?" asked the Hispanic smoking guy, his face getting pale. "What's that?" I said, "I'm a white boy with a migraine and a pump shotgun, and I don't want to listen to your horseshit. No habla español." They all started backing away. It's a bit comical to watch about 50 Mexicans walking backwards with their hands on their crotches. Some of them turned and trotted off south, leaving their goods in the street or on top of cars. The Hispanic smoking guy, backing up, still holding the laptop, said, "You ain't gonna shoot nobody, man. Besides, you can't hit all of us. Somebody gonna take that gun away from you and shove it up your arse," he muttered, but I think he was just bluffing. I started twisting the choke on the shotgun. "You're right, burrito monkey. I guess I better choke this back to make sure I hit enough of you if I have to squeeze the trigger." I was just bluffing myself. They were all backing up. More and more of them, as they got further away, were running off. The Hispanic guy flicked his cigarette at me and kept walking backwards. I was a good 100 meters from the house now. "You ain't shit, gringo. Someday this place is gonna be down and brown, porky pig. I'd like to see you try that shit again someday." He turned and trotted off. I stood in the street and kept the shotgun up until the entire street was clear. Then I backed up and went back to the front yard. Trotsky came out of his house, finally. He looked terrified. "Violence doesn't solve anything, man," he croaked. I stared at him for a long time before I said, "I hope you don't think that you and I are friends. I can do better than you for friends. I have pretended to be civil with you in the past. In the future, I want you to stay away from me. You and I are not alike and never will be." Then I turned and went back inside the house. I will finish with an epilogue of what happened that evening and the following weeks in my last post.